Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast based on writers sitting around drinking coffee and or occasionally wine and talking about anything and everything. We may use explicit language and will almost certainly drop F-bombs, but that is not the point or the drive of the content, so please consider us PG-13. There will be rants and raves and guests and occasionally readings. There will be conflicting creative advice driven by at least 3 utterly disparate points of view. Your hosts today through this madness are John Schmidt, Chaz Brenchley, and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 19, World Building with Juliette Wade. Everyone, welcome Juliette Wade to the coffee shop.
Hello, Juliette.
Yay.
Hi there. It's nice to be here.
Juliette also has a podcast, and besides being an amazing author and a fantastic coordinator working with Goodreads and many other programs, we were hoping that she might talk to us a bit today on the topic of world building, because that question seems to come up a lot.
Yes,
So,
I love world building. I talk about it for hours at a time.
excellent.
I won't do it for hours here, though.
Well, we have a little bit
just
of...
have to have you back. But
Yeah.
before we get started, what's the name of your podcast?
My podcast is called Dive Into World Building. It's actually a YouTube show.
I was going to say, I didn't think it was
It's
a podcast.
not really a podcast. So you can go and you can find me on YouTube and my channel, and it has all my videos. And if you want to find written reports on all the videos that I've done, I have those at my blog, Dive Into World Building.
So why did you choose to do it as videos rather than as a podcast?
Well,
I mean, what
it was a
extra
long
element does...
evolution, actually. It started when Google Hangouts started.
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought Google Hangouts was such a cool idea that I got a bunch of friends together and I was like, hey, we should talk about something. And of course, naturally, it was world building because that is what I talk about incessantly. And then we said, that was fun. Let's do it again. Now, when Google Hangouts first started, they didn't have any kind of recording. It was just you went, you had a conversation, and then you left, and it went
was
poof,
gone.
and it was gone.
Okay.
So once we started doing it regularly because we thought this was so much fun, I started taking notes on what we had talked about so people who hadn't been there might be able to enjoy something of what we had spoken about. And then when Google changed the format and they started doing automatic recordings to YouTube, I just automatically did that because it seemed like a good idea. But I never stopped doing the notes and the write-ups because I find those useful for people who don't have time to listen to audio for an hour or the ability in some way,
Right.
you know.
Sure.
So, yeah, and I've been doing it for more than 5 years.
How often?
Once a week.
See, I'm not crazy.
That's
I take breaks. I do take breaks.
that is an awful lot of talking about world building.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, the world is a very large place.
This is very true.
Yeah.
The universe is a large place full of many possible worlds and many possible universes.
Absolutely. We've spoken about geology. We've spoken about bathrooms. We've spoken about gender roles. And we've spoken about how to explore the implications of your speculative concept. And we've talked about all sorts of things. It's just, you know, every week we have a discussion and then I say, you know, do you guys have anything you want to talk about? And they always have things they want to talk about. So people suggest things and it's really fun.
So how many people are generally involved in this conversation?
So initially, it was either me and one other person or me and whoever else wanted to show up. And so at this point, it's usually me and 3 or 4 other people.
Okay. It's a nice comfy
It's about
group.
the size
Yeah.
of this conversation.
Right.
It's a nice group, but it's not very big. I've occasionally had conversations where there were 8 people.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know if you recall, Google Hangouts was actually limited to 10 people.
Oh,
Yes, it
right.
was.
Okay.
Now, recently, it was the
discontinued.
Hangouts on Air were discontinued, and so the show's been a bit bumpy looking for new technology, but currently we're using Zoom meetings, and that appears to be working, and they can route live to YouTube.
Excellent.
So that aspect of it
Right.
has been
Yeah.
resolved. But again, right now the attendance is a little bumpy too.
So do you have? I mean, is there like a sort of a queue of people who would like to join if a space develops?
He wants Chaz wants in.
No. You misunderstand me completely.
Well,
I'm just curious.
So here's the thing. So one of the things that I've always found interesting about this is reason it's called Dive into World Building is because we are not here to talk about world building. We're here to go deep into some aspect of world building. And that's why we keep having topics and topics and topics. Because if you keep giving world building 101 1,000 times, it gets boring.
Yes.
But if you focus in on little tiny things like...
I like bathrooms.
Disability and accommodation. Well, bathrooms was a great topic. We had such a good time with that. And we've talked about colors. And all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But the idea is to sort of get below the surface, to look at different kinds of phenomena in our world and how they play out across different cultures. And so at a certain point in 2014, I thought, well, I really need to up my game a bit in terms of just exploring a diversity of world building views. And so what I started doing was interviewing people, interviewing authors. And I interview authors about once a month.
Right.
And so I've had all kinds of really amazing people on the show. I feel super, super lucky. Anne Leckie's been on the show. And Kate Jemison has been on the show. Ken Liu has been on the show. Those are some of my, major lights.
Yeah.
Most recently, J.M. Fry was on the show. Tade Thompson's been on the show. I think I'm pronouncing.
Did you ever get
right.
Kate Elliott?
I have not interviewed her. There's a whole
Do you
world out
want
there.
her?
I would love
We
to.
can get her.
I would love to interview her. Absolutely.
Because when you say world building, she's been giving classes in it recently.
Well, you know what? That's great. Yeah.
And, Kit, of course, is very passionate about the anthropology involved in the linguistics of
and
all
when
of
you
her
say
alternative.
Kit, you mean Catherine Carr.
I do mean Catherine Carr. So
Yes. So, my academic background is in anthropology and linguistics and education. And my writing completely changed when I started studying those things.
not at all shocked.
Well, I actually wasn't a writer until after I had been studying them a while. Because, I was a writer when I was a kid. And then I just sort of did the academic thing for a very, very, very long time. And then I really started writing fiction in 1999 when I was in my PhD program.
Right. Did you expect to become an academic?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for many years, absolutely, yeah. I came second for a job in the Department of African and Asian Languages at the University of Florida, in fact. And at that point, I had just had my first child and threw up my hands and said, you know what, I'm just going to take a breather and write some fiction and raise children and see how I go. And, the problem was that once I started writing science fiction, I couldn't stop. And,
that is a problem.
And, right? So it was about how to fit things in. And at this point, I'm very happy writing science fiction and, having my family and teaching part-time sometimes.
And talking about world building.
And talking about world building once a week.
So I'm sure you've covered this in one of them, but how would you, if somebody said, well, you write science fiction, I want to write fantasy, that's completely different. How would you smile at them gently the way she's smiling at me right now? And say,
I don't think this is gentle. I think this is gleeful.
Almost maniacal. But
almost maniacal.
Comes with I think of world building as something that everyone does. And it's not even restricted to fiction because...
Recreationism is in history writing.
Pages are blank. They don't have worlds on them until you build one there. And so you can build a world that is an argumentative world for a paper, or you can build a world that is a facsimile of our world for nonfiction, or you can build a world that has dramatic departures from our world. So
you think basically that every time a writer approaches a blank screen or a blank sheet of paper, they are world building first.
You could see that. And in the way of, if I view that every procedural cop drama I see on TV as being fanfic, and I do, sorry, but But there's a certain world of how that everybody agrees that this is what happens, and there's a crime scene, and this is what all cops do.
And there
so
are
that
concepts of justice that permeate those shows that are not the same as concepts of justice as they are played out in the existing
exactly.
justice
Oh my God!
And then there's
regional variants, and
Yeah.
international variants. Charles Strauss, of course, with his comments on halting state and Rule 34.
Oh yeah, the virtual world. But there's that agreement that a world has been created. So once the world is created, whether it's real or not, it's what everybody writes in. So if you try to rebel off of that, you run into some problems.
Right. So those are what I like to call public narratives.
Public narratives, good word.
And public narratives are very, very powerful, and people don't like departures from public narratives.
Yeah.
But you also have to set expectations. Like when you're starting a story of a particular type, you have to set expectations in a certain way. So I have a personal rule for my Varan world, which is the world that's coming out in my book that's coming out in February. And the rule is there has to be high tech somewhere on page 1.
Okay.
Because the way that the society is organized, people tend to like to slot it into a different time period sort of bucket.
Okay.
Into the public narrative that they associate with, 18th century fiction or even medieval fiction. Sometimes has been, So I make sure to put electric lights or digital watches or something right up, bam, on page 1
Okay.
in a nice cozy spot, so nobody's particularly hit in the face with them, but just so that I can say, look, I told you on page 1, I wasn't springing this on you.
Right. So just as a sidebar, what's your book that's coming out in February?
So my book is called Mazes of Power, and it's the product of an enormous amount of work. It's coming out from Daw Books, and the publication date is February 4th, 2020. And
okay, so it's on a Thursday. Why do I say Thursday? On a weekday around then, we will get you back here to talk about the book.
Well, I would love to do that.
But that was just a sidebar because we don't want to get distracted from our main theme.
Absolutely.
So when people have come onto your podcast, for instance, do they say things like, "So I have this great idea for this character, and I need to know, what kind of building do they have?" I mean, to stop back, it can come from 3 different directions. I have an idea for a character, or I have an idea for this world. I don't know the characters of the story yet. Or is there, I have an idea for a story. I don't know about the world or the characters yet. Because there's 3 different world building.
I think there's more than one way to enter this problem. The way that I see it, everything is interconnected. So in my view, the character is actually an ambassador for the world. And one of my major inspirations in writing, which is maybe surprising, is the Pillow Book of Sei Shonagon.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a diary written by a Japanese lady in waiting to Japanese noblewomen in the year 1000. And the thing that makes this book outstanding is it's her diary. And she is so incredibly opinionated and judgmental about everything she writes about that her personality and her world just spring off the page. So when I set about writing, I like to have a character who's extremely opinionated in the way that only a person in these circumstances in this world would be opinionated, who is not shy about telling you what they think of the things that are going on. But again, you can find your way into it in any direction. You can start with a gadget. Say, oh, I've got this great idea for a gadget.
Now,
What kind of technological underpinnings would this gadget's existence have to have? And then what kind of culture, what kind of world, what kind of physical resources would have to be there in order for such a thing to exist? It's like a giant web. And so land in any spot and you can find your way outward from there.
So at what point do you personally start writing the fiction?
Do you mean what do I start with?
What I mean is you have this complex structured world and the novel takes place within it. Did you build the world before you started writing the novel, or do the two things happen adjacent and simultaneous?
Well, I started with a very, in terms of the Varan world, I started with a very, very basic idea that was actually sort of a core fantasy idea, that there had been, it was like a plot idea almost, that there had been kings and they had been cast down and then they had become the lowest of the low, and then they were supposed to come back up and regain their power and stuff. And that was when I was 13.
Okay.
And so over time, the entire concept just sort of aggregated more things and became complex. And I started interrogating it a little bit and started asking, like, well, if this were actually to happen in an actual world, what would that actually look like, and how would that play out? And I decided at a certain point that I didn't really like the idea of these people just coming back and seizing power and stuff. I was like, what the heck is that? So, but anyway, that is not the piece that the novel that's Mazes of Power is about. It's very different because a great many things have changed since then. But I decided when I started studying anthropology and linguistics that I wanted the world to be very socially realistic, and I did a lot of independent research on psychology because I wanted it to be psychologically realistic. And again, it's all about taking these basic ideas and then chasing them into the deepest possible corners that you can.
The psychology, I think, of the world. I love that you said that, because I have found so often when I read books that they throw it out because they're very two-dimensional in some ways. That everyone has motivations, everybody has an inside voice, everybody, and sometimes it's like it's easier to think people are just one dimension or two dimensions, as current political climates seem to want to cast everybody into one or two dimensions. But beneath the fact that I might be a very greedy individual and I love money, and under that I might be there's so many other possibilities. Yeah. And I think it's the power of
a very devout strangler.
That could be me. I'm not saying anything online, but that was the way I liked things like the Miyazaki movies in those worlds, because this is the evil witch down there and she caused all of this. Really, she's not, well, maybe not evil, maybe not just, well, she's just trying to get things done. Well, there's no order here. It's very frustrating. So she's just a woman trying to get by. And that's what's kind of neat about the psychology of them, that you don't even realize it's psychology, is it's complex and nobody's 100% good or 100% bad. And so
one of my favorite classes in graduate school that was really instrumental in me becoming a writer was called discourse analysis. And it's a branch of linguistics that studies levels of structure higher than the sentence. Okay. So it studies paragraphs and it studies discourses, and it studies, for example, entire patterns of political discourse and how people express their social relationships and their alignments and stuff through the way that they talk. And so this has become a really big deal for me, because one of the things that I'm trying to accomplish is internal points of view. And my worlds don't typically, if you look at my science fiction that I wrote for Analog, there's usually human and then there's an alien, but it's usually very much about how the alien thinks, and that's what you're exploring as you go through. In the Varan world, there are no outsiders. There are no visitors to the Varan world. It's fully self-contained. And so I spent a lot of years figuring out how to write the perspective of somebody who had grown up within that structure. And the triangulation, of course, that occurs is because the different point of view characters are from different castes within the society, and each caste has its own culture, and each person within that culture has their own relationship to the ideals that they're ostensibly supposed to hold, and they struggle with the things that they're supposed to hold as virtues, for example, or the relationships that causes them to expect from people around them. Because I think that in our world, people struggle with the kinds of things like here's how I'm supposed to be a moral person. How do I feel about that? Running true to type is one of the things that I find least exciting about fiction.
It is. I had a friend treated me to a long discussion in anticipation of his wedding, hi Igor, on growing up in the Soviet school system in Soviet Russia and his experiences there. And he had a lot of wonderful stories that were very alien to everything I knew, but he summed it up of saying, in Russia, you are created as a unit, as a society of a state. More than even a family, you are a state. And then you desperately want to be an individual. And he says he came to America, and everybody here is encouraged to be an individual by everything that's Americanism. It's, we are the lone wolf, we are the lone gunman, we are the mossy knoll, we are all of these good and bad lone things, trying to figure out how to be a group, how to be a society.
Yeah.
And it just made for an interesting two different perspectives on, and how they get along with each other then. How does this nation get on with that nation, given the basic differences up through school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The basic differences of the individual that they have been educated in by the society. And as you say, you can come at it in any angle. You touch a web and it all interconnects.
Yep. So that's really fun, and I do a lot of work with dialogue and stuff, including regional dialects that I invent.
Oh, there's an interesting discussion. There are now, I've seen, and it flared up again, do you write the dialects or not?
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you exactly what I do.
Tell me what you do.
I don't like to change spelling. I have one regional dialect that has a consonant dropping rule at the end of words. And so when that happens, I will put an apostrophe and drop the consonant at the end of the word.
Sure.
But it's in restricted, linguistically defined parameters. So it's not every word. It's just some. But mostly the dialects that I write are actually metrical dialects. So I change the stress patterns of how people speak.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't, I'll change the words they use or the expressions that they use, because that's something that changes across dialects. But I will also change whether they're speaking mostly iambically or whether they're speaking trocheically, for example.
Now, how would you write that? Is an interesting, I had a professor once that was Norwegian, and the emphasis was on the wrong syllable all the way through it, and it gave you a little bit of a headache watching as he bobbed and weaved and talked, and it was on the wrong syllable.
Yeah.
How do you express that in writing?
You
Well,
don't.
I don't.
No,
I
you
don't.
You choose another way because you can't.
So
So you shift the rhythms.
you shift the rhythms. It's actually pretty straightforward. So I have one character who is from a place called Safe Harbor, and he says, "Young master, please tell us now you've not gone deaf or blind and ease us all our worry."
Yeah.
Right? And those stress is exactly where they should be in those words. It's just that is not the pattern of stress that everyone else in the book is using.
Cunning you are. Approve, Yoda would.
Yes.
It is a natural consequence of any of the more complicated languages that different areas speak differently. In English, Americans, Australians, Irish, South Africans, and for God's sake, 27 different subparts of England can say the same sentence.
He's right here.
Well, but the fact that he lived in a city and we can't call him a member of that city because he wasn't born there. There we go for another cultural difference. In America, you're American. And you might, if you live in California, you're pretty much Californian. But if you weren't born there, you don't get to be one of those in England, as far as I can tell. Because you're not a Geordie.
I am so not a Geordie.
And how long did you live in Newcastle?
30-some years. Yeah, it's not long enough. My mother moved to Cornwall just as she was turning 60. And she looked at me one day and said, if I live till I'm 80, I'll still be an incomer here. And she lived to be 95, and she was still an incomer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was a very welcome incomer, and they were lovely to her, but she was not one of them, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just English. And now Chinese.
And here it's rare for people to have been born in California.
Yeah,
when I meet people who've been born in California, I go, really? Me too. but
I was born in Southern California, which adds an extra
yeah,
layer.
see.
But that...
I was born, just a few. Oh, there you go.
So if we can have... I love deeping into the everybody poos, everybody poo, whatever that child's
You're
book
back to the
is.
bathroom.
I'm back to the bathroom, but it took me to an interesting place. What is forbidden? Is there anything that you don't go into when you're building a world, or...
Wait, something that you avoid working on, or something...
talking about.
Or talking... Yeah, yes.
So designing taboos is a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? And things that you don't talk about, or things that it's not polite to talk about. In the Varan world, there's something called muck walking. And muck walking is actually easy to talk about. It means that you're kind of slumming it with lower castes. It's not something that you want to be accused of doing, but it's not like people go, don't talk about that if you say that. Don't say it to me. Don't tell me I'm muck walking, but we could easily talk about somebody else muck walking.
It's always
by contrast, there's another word, which is cross-marking. And cross-marking is illegal, and it means that you're adopting the legislated mark of another caste. So there are legislated things and there are non-legislated things. Mm-hmm. So for the servant caste, for example, their legislated mark is a tattoo on the forehead. And kids just have a cosmetic dot until they grow up and get to the point where they can get the tattoo. But anyway... Mbati also tend to wear black. Now, that is not their legislated mark. So if you wear black, you're not cross-marking. But if you draw a tattoo on your forehead, you are cross-marking. And cross-marking is considered gross and not a thing that we talk about.
But you could be mud walking as a servant by wearing black.
Muck walking is just being in a place where lowers are.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you could wear black and go there, and mingle legitimately, but if you drew a tattoo on your face, this is
so for example,
illegal?
Yeah, that's illegal.
Yeah.
So and you could probably get arrested, thrown in jail, possibly killed.
So the caste system is enforced with the legal.
Oh yeah, it's legally enforced. Varna has a lot of rules and laws and things. So, for example, not in this book, but I have a character in a later book who is about to go to another city and is worried about being in a place where there's just lots and lots and lots of people. And her friend says to her, I know exactly what you need to do. Come with me. I'm buying you some clothes. And what she does is she buys her a set of black clothes. And she says, if you wear black clothes, you know that no one will ever grab you from behind. Because they cannot tell until you turn around whether you're Mbati or not. And nobody touches Mbati. So it's that kind of little stuff, like tiny personal safety life hacks, right? That I love. Little details of personal life, little details of personal decisions that are connected to the rules, but not actually just people sitting there laying out what the rules are.
Right. So did you base this on something like one of the more Indian systems, or like the Japanese with the Eda class?
The Japanese system, but it isn't the same. I added levels and tweaked things. And, yeah. So anyway, but we're not talking about.
We're not talking about the book till next February.
But I mean, it makes for good. It's world building.
But this is the world building example.
But yeah, and that's what I sort of meant by the different classes and the different, untouchables. And so do we not? And so you can build that in. Is there any topic that is just forbidden because of the common world in science fiction? In Polite Company, once upon a time, you didn't talk about sex, religion, or politics, but we sure write about it. So is there anything left that is, we just don't really go there?
Surely not.
No, I try not to. I try not to omit anything. But I did realize at a certain point that I had forgotten to give anybody glasses, and I was like, "Oh, do people wear glasses? Well, I should probably figure that out." but mostly, whether people do a particular thing has to do with how they see their caste identity. So little tiny things would be weirdly distributed, and that's one of the Varan characteristics. Is nobody pierces their ears except Arisen, and nobody wears makeup except Cartoonin. Right. Even the nobles don't wear makeup because that would be a lower thing to do. Right. I mean, what are you going to do? Paint your face like an artisan? I mean, are you kidding me? So, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. So, kind of in all of this, it sounds like you can really come at world building from almost any angle with an idea, or I want to explore something. And then how did you write it?
You can also backform things.
You can backform things.
Yeah.
When you did tons and tons of research in advance and took a lot of notes. Did you use any tools in particular, or just notepads, or?
Well, so
5,000 Microsoft.
I was living in Japan at one point, and so that was the point in my life when I stopped actually using a lot of paper, and I started using just my computer because I wanted a laptop and I wanted everything that I was doing to be able to come with me. And not to have to put a lot of pounds of stuff in a suitcase in order to get my research, etc., back. Because at that time I was doing my PhD and I had these reams of paper of articles that I was having to do for my exams. And anyway, so I wanted everything from my writing to be in the laptop. But I mean, I used encyclopedias back at the beginning when I was first researching. I meant
more of the writing as you're writing these things down.
Are there any tools? Are there any systems?
Are you a Scrivener girl?
I'm a Scrivener girl because so for several reasons. One is I'm a fanatical outliner. I outline and then I write. I write actually chronologically, but I outline and then I re-outline and then the more. So my notes consist of a vision of the entire book end to end in outline form that can change and be manipulated. But it's so important for me to keep the continuity of the psychology between the one point of view from chapter to chapter that I like to write chronologically.
Mm-hmm. I totally had you down as a pantser.
Yeah, no. The opposite, in fact.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah. I have 5 books planned.
Uh-huh.
And I know a lot about them already. And
you
outlining.
Said pantser?
Pantser.
By the seat of his pants.
Writing
is
by
how
the seat of your pants.
Her pants. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean,
I
that's a pretty common way of talking about it.
It is. And we're going to put links to all of these stories and interesting things that especially Juliet has mentioned and her upcoming book release on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We love email. If anybody has any questions and they want to post it on Facebook, we will get Juliet to answer that. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the host. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre McGaffey-Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsor is Jackal Designs, enabling you all to buy cool WDC swag.